The cameras stopped rolling. The audience quietly filed out. And Ed McMahon leaned close to Johnny Carson and whispered something that would remain secret for 15 years. May 22, 1992. The final episode of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. 30 years. 4,531 episodes. 6 Emmy Awards. Countless laughs. And now, at 11:59 p.m., it was ending. Johnny had just finished his final monologue. The audience had given him a standing ovation that lasted 4 minutes. He'd thanked Doc Severinsen and the band. He'd thanked the crew. He'd thanked America for letting him into their homes every night for 3 decades. The red lights on the cameras blinked off. The director called "Cut" one last time. The studio audience, still on their feet, began moving toward the exits, many of them crying, all of them knowing they'd witnessed the end of an era. But Ed McMahon didn't move. He stood beside Johnny's desk, watching his friend of 35 years sit in that familiar chair for the last time. Johnny's hands rested on the wooden surface, fingers tracing the grain he'd touched thousands of times. His trademark smile was gone. In its place was an expression of profound exhaustion and something else, something that looked like grief. The crew began dismantling equipment. Stage managers directed people out. The studio was emptying quickly, everyone understanding instinctively that this moment belonged to Johnny and Ed alone. Ed stepped closer to the desk. Johnny looked up at him, and for the first time in 30 years of working together, either man knew what to say. The Tonight Show's final episode had just ended. And in the empty studio, Ed McMahon was about to say something that would change everything. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 35 years earlier. Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon met in 1957. Johnny was hosting a game show called "Who Do You Trust?" and needed an announcer. Ed was a former Marine pilot doing commercial voice work and local television in Philadelphia. The network paired them together, expecting nothing more than a professional working relationship. What developed instead was one of the most significant friendships in television history. They were opposites in almost every way. Johnny was reserved, private, guarded with his emotions. Ed was boisterous, warm, wore his heart openly. Johnny crafted every word carefully. Ed spoke from the gut. Johnny never drank before a show. Ed loved a good time and made no apologies for it. But on camera, they were magic. Ed knew exactly when to laugh, when to set up Johnny's jokes, when to rescue a bit that wasn't working. He could read Johnny's smallest gesture, a raised eyebrow, a slight pause, and respond perfectly. Their timing was supernatural. More importantly, they trusted each other completely. In 1962, when NBC offered Johnny The Tonight Show, his first call was to Ed. "I need you with me," Johnny said. "I can't do this without you." Ed didn't hesitate. He left a comfortable career in Philadelphia, moved his family to California, and sat beside Johnny's desk for the next 30 years. They went through everything together. Johnny's divorces, all 3 of them. Ed's financial troubles. Johnny's son Ricky's death in a car accident. Ed's own son's struggle with addiction. The ratings wars. The network politics. The endless pressure of doing a show 5 nights a week, year after year. Through it all, they showed up for each other. Not just on camera, but in the quiet moments backstage. The conversations in Johnny's dressing room after difficult shows. The phone calls at 2 a.m. when the world felt too heavy. The unspoken understanding that comes from sharing the same foxhole for decades. But there was something Ed had never told Johnny. A secret he'd carried since 1957, locked away in a place so deep that even his own wife didn't know the full truth. And tonight, in the empty studio, with 30 years of The Tonight Show behind them and an uncertain future ahead, Ed McMahon decided it was finally time. Carson stopped mid-farewell. The entire studio froze. The crew had mostly cleared out now. A few technicians remained coiling cables, their movements quiet and respectful. Doc Severinsen was packing up his trumpet at the bandstand, moving slowly, reluctant to leave. Johnny stood up from behind his desk. He picked up one of his blue cue cards. The ones he'd used for every monologue, covered in his precise handwriting. He looked at it for a long moment, then carefully placed it in his jacket pocket. 30 years, Johnny said quietly, more to himself than to Ed. I don't know who I am without this. Ed's jaw tightened. His eyes filled with tears, something the audience had seen countless times when Ed laughed too hard at Johnny's jokes, but never like this. Not tears of sadness. Johnny, Ed said, his voice rough. Before we walk out of here, I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen. Can you do that? Johnny turned to face him fully. Ed, what? Just listen, Ed repeated, and something in his tone made Johnny nod and fall silent. Ed took a breath. In 1957, when we first started working together, I got a phone call. From a producer I knew. Big network guy. He said they were putting together a news show and they wanted me to host it. Not announce. Host. It was everything I'd been working toward my whole career. Johnny's brow furrowed. This was news to him. You never mentioned. Because I turned it down. Ed interrupted. I told them no. And you want to know why? The studio was completely silent now. Even the technicians had stopped moving. I watched you work for 2 weeks. Ed continued, his voice gaining strength. I watched how you prepared. How you treated the crew. How you handled guests who weren't good. How you saved bad sketches. How you never blamed anyone else when something went wrong. And I realized something. He stepped closer to Johnny, close enough that the studio cameras, if they'd been rolling, would have caught the tears streaming down both men's faces. I realized that my gift wasn't being the star. My gift was recognizing greatness and helping it shine. You were going to change television, Johnny. I knew it in my bones. And I knew that if I took that hosting job, I'd spend my whole career being pretty good. But if I stayed with you, if I sat beside you and supported you and helped you be the best version of yourself, I'd be part of something that mattered. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny stood frozen. In 35 years of friendship, Ed had never said anything like this. Had never revealed that he'd sacrificed his own hosting dreams to be Johnny's sidekick. Ed, I never knew. You weren't supposed to know, Ed said. That was the whole point. My job was to make you look good. To laugh at your jokes. To set you up. To be there when you needed someone to trust. And Johnny, I have never, not for one single day, regretted that choice. Johnny's hand went to his face, covering his eyes. His shoulders shook. You gave me a career, Ed continued. You gave me purpose. You gave me 30 years of doing something that mattered. But more than that, you gave me a friendship I never expected. A brotherhood. And I need you to know something before we walk out of this studio. He reached out and gripped Johnny's shoulder, the same gesture he'd made 10,000 times on camera, but this time it carried the weight of 3 decades. Everything I have, everything I am, every good thing in my life. It all traces back to the day I chose to sit beside your desk instead of behind my own. And I would make that choice again. Every single time. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny lowered his hand. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. For a man who'd built a career on perfect composure, he looked completely undone. Ed, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why are you telling me this now? Because you said you don't know who you are without this show, Ed replied. And I needed you to understand something before you figure that out. He pulled a small object from his pocket. A cue card. Old, yellowed with age, the edges worn. He handed it to Johnny. What is this? Read it. Johnny looked down at the card. The handwriting wasn't his. It was Ed's from 35 years ago. 3 sentences, written in blue ink. Help him be great. That's the job. Nothing else matters. I wrote that in 1957, Ed said. The day after I turned down that hosting job. I've carried it in my wallet every single day since. It's my reminder of what I chose and why I chose it. Johnny stared at the card, his fingers trembling. You want to know who you are without this show? Ed continued. You're the man who made me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. You're the man who taught me that supporting someone else's dream can be more fulfilling than chasing your own. You're the man who showed me what loyalty and excellence and integrity look like. He took the cue card back from Johnny and placed it in his friend's jacket pocket, right next to the card from tonight's final monologue. Keep that, Ed said. When you're sitting in your Malibu house wondering what comes next, look at it. Remember that for 35 years, you were so worth believing in that I gave up everything else to be part of your journey. That's who you are, Johnny. With or without this desk. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny Carson, who had maintained perfect composure through every crisis, every personal tragedy, every moment of his professional life, broke down completely. He grabbed Ed and held him in an embrace that was half hug, half collapse. His body shook with sobs, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he'd kept locked for 3 decades of performing. Ed held his friend, his own tears falling freely, and for 5 full minutes they stood there in the empty studio. 2 men who'd spent 30 years making America laugh, finally letting themselves grieve the end of the greatest partnership in television history. Doc Severinsen, still at the bandstand, watched silently. The few remaining crew members looked away, understanding this moment was sacred. When Johnny finally pulled back, his face was red and swollen. I don't know how to do this without you. You're not going to, Ed said simply. I'll be in Malibu. You'll be in Malibu. We'll have lunch. We'll play golf. We'll complain about our wives and our kids and getting old. The only difference is we won't have 300 people watching us do it. Johnny laughed, a broken, watery laugh, but genuine. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never tell anyone what you just told me. About turning down that hosting job. About the cue card. All of it. Ed's eyes widened. Johnny, why? Because, Johnny interrupted. If people knew you sacrificed your own dreams for mine, they'd think less of me. They'd say I held you back. They'd say you wasted your career being my announcer when you could have been a star. That's ridiculous. Promise me. Johnny insisted. Let them think you were just Ed McMahon, the sidekick who laughed too loud. Let them think this was just a job for you. But you and I will know the truth. We'll know what you gave up. We'll know what it meant. Ed looked at his friend for a long moment. Then he nodded. I promise. I won't tell anyone. They shook hands. Then, because that didn't feel like enough, they hugged again. Thank you, Johnny whispered into Ed's shoulder. For everything. For 35 years of showing up. For making me better. For being my friend. Thank you, Ed whispered back. For being worth it. They walked out of Studio 3 together, Ed's arm around Johnny's shoulders. The lights were turned off behind them. The Tonight Show was over. Ed McMahon kept his promise. For 15 years, he never told anyone about the hosting job he turned down, about the cue card in his wallet, about the choice he made in 1957 to support greatness instead of chasing his own. When Ed died in 2009, his family found the yellowed cue card in his wallet. On the back, in different ink, was one more line he'd added over the years. Best decision I ever made. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. They buried Ed with full military honors. Johnny Carson had died 3 years earlier, in 2006. At Johnny's funeral, Ed had delivered the eulogy with tears streaming down his face, never once mentioning the secret he'd kept for 50 years. Now they were both gone. But the cue card remains, donated to the Smithsonian with Johnny's desk and Ed's microphone, 3 pieces of the greatest partnership television ever knew. And on quiet nights in television studios across America, young sidekicks and announcers tell each other the story of Ed McMahon, who gave up everything to sit beside greatness and never regretted it for a single day.